Hello and welcome to Python Fundamentals. In this course, we learn the underpinning Python programming skills, preparing for our journey towards mastering the Django Framework and the Python programming language. This tutorial is part of a series of tutorials. You can find the link to the whole playlist in the video description. This tutorial is from our Python Programming Fundamentals for Django Developers course, which you can find and purchase on Udemy. You will find all the latest and updated tutorials, as well as resources and assessments to help accelerate your learning of the subject. The link to the course, which will always provide the best price, can be found in the video description. So now we know how to write comments in the Python programming language, let's discuss a little bit about when to write code comments. When to write code comments can be very situational. If you are a new developer, the amount or the type of code comments that you write might be completely different to that of an experienced developer working in industry. As a new developer, you may want to start to build notes within your code base as you develop to help remind yourself of different commands or what the code is doing. As or if you move into university or school, generally, teachers, professors will ask you to create code comments. There'll be marks or grades available in your assignments for it, and this can help others determine whether you understand the code base that you're writing, and also help others read and understand what you've done. So at this point, the type of comments that you're developing will describe or explain what the code does. Now, at this point, you might have moved away from writing comments about commands simply because you are now more familiar with the programming language. So you focus more on the idea of explaining what the code does or what the code is for. Having been told about the importance of commenting your code at university or at school, you may be very surprised to see the lack of code comments in the code base generated or created in industry. And there's many reasons for this. As you become more adept and skilled at developing applications, you learn how to simplify and make your code more readable. Engineers generally strive towards breaking up their code into more manageable, readable, digestible chunks. Now, this can lead to less comments being needed. Take, for example, our Django application that we're building. We learned that we build a Django project and then we break the project down into smaller chunks. This was Django apps, so that we can concentrate our focus on different aspects or different features of the application in smaller compartments or smaller digestible ways. So by doing that, we're breaking up the application into smaller pieces, which can, like I said, it can lead to less comments being needed because it's easier to read the code in those sections. In addition to that, there's lots of tools, linting tools, for example, and formatting tools that can enhance the readability of our language, of our program, of our code. And that can lead to, again, needing less comments in our code. There is a real skill here when you're developing your application. We want to try and keep your code as simple as possible. By keeping your code simple, it makes it more readable. Properly naming, for example, functions that we briefly mentioned, and variables, which we'll talk about later, as well as classes and other items in our code. By properly naming things in our application, that can give more information about potentially what that code is doing or achieving, and then again, that leads to less inline comments being needed. There are definitely cases when comments will be required or can be utilized. So generally, I like to describe 3 typical areas where you might find comments being utilized in code in industry. And of course, that doesn't mean that you can't start utilizing this approach now. So the first section here, complex section of code. Now, although we try to strive to build simple applications that are easy to read, very readable, there are times where code can become very complex. There may be some sort of what we describe as an edge case, where potentially we use kind of rarely used sections of the framework or rarely used pieces of programming language, and we want to try and make our code as readable as possible. So by utilizing a different approach to maybe that we've been utilizing throughout the code base, we let the user or let the reader know that maybe we've changed the approach, and we give them additional information which is going to help and support them being able to read and understand the code. And that's an important factor when we're creating comments. We want to complement the code. We don't want to describe what the code does necessarily, but we want to complement the code. So we can make the assumption in industry, for example, that there is a specialist reading our code. So we don't need to describe what the code does, because they can probably see, they understand what a variable is and what a function is, etc. So we try and complement the code. You may also see comments utilized as notes, to-do notes, for example, for code that has not yet been written. That can be a really helpful way to keep track of what you need to do in a module on a page, for example, and you can then delete or remove as you've built that section or part of the code. You may also use or see comments utilized as a way of creating documentation for that particular application. So that is something that we will discuss later on in this section, but this is an example here. So I've typed in Django GitHub, I've navigated to the official Django codebase, and you can explore the codebase and take a look at the comments that are used and so on. So here I've navigated to Django folder, apps, and this registry file. This is just a random file that I've selected, and in here what you can see are comments. This will be described as a doc string here, and this can be captured and utilized to generate documentation. That's what I was just describing. But what's really interesting here is that you can explore this code base and have a look at the different comments that are being utilized. And that might help you learn a little bit more about the language, the approach, and what exactly is being commented. What type of comments are actually being used.